Welcome to the MuseScore Café for August 28th, Wednesday, 2019. My name is Marc Sabatella. I'm the Director of Education for MuseScore. This is my weekly series of informal chats, video streams where I talk about some aspect of MuseScore and or making music. And I usually pick a topic and kind of mostly talk about that topic. If other things come up, if people have questions, that's all fine too. So if you're watching live, by all means, feel free to participate in the chat. So this is the first week of classes for the university where I'm teaching right now at Regis University in Denver. And I need to mention that we are in the news right now and that the school has been under a cyber attack. So I was actually planning on doing this cafe from school and had kind of scoped out how I was going to do that because last time I tried to do that I had some technical glitches. This time the technical glitches will be far worse. We have no internet access whatsoever. Computers down, internet down, no printers, no nothing. So it's been an interesting first week of class. I also this week so I've mentioned before that there's a music theory course that I am developing, an online course. So I'm also going to be am teaching now the music theory, the basic, it's called Music Foundations of Music. And so one of the things that I'm going to be showing you today is some of the teaching materials that I am putting together for that class, Foundations of Music, and that I will use in my because there's already plenty of materials for the class just in the textbook, but I'm supplementing it with stuff that I want to use for my online course. So I want to talk about some of the things that I'm doing for that. And again, anything else that anyone is curious about. I've done a few other of these cafes or other presentations talking about education, so there's always some amount of repetition of material, but I'll just talk about what I'm interested in right now. And what I'm interested in right now is putting together handouts that explain concepts in the way I think a handout should, which is to say, to remind you of the stuff that you learned in the lecture. In other words, in class, I'll go into more detail on things, or there's a textbook that goes into more detail, but then you want kind of a little cheat sheet on things. So I am putting together a series of handouts for the topics that I'm dealing with, and I want to show you some of the techniques I'm using to create these handouts. Yeah, I would have been at school today doing this, as I mentioned, but yeah, because we have no internet, I'm back at home. The handout that I am creating here is one, let me hide the inspector. I'm going to press F8, which hides the inspector. For that matter, I'm going to press F9 and hide the palette window so we can just see the handout in more detail. So this is a handout that I've been putting together just to show people basics of music notation. It's not designed to teach you music notation, but to familiarize you with terminology. And then there's other handouts that are going to go into more detail on things. So and I wanted to not just talk about standard music notation, even though that's the primary focus of the course that I'm teaching, is teaching music notation and then basic aspects of theory like scales and chords. But standard music notation is not the only form of notation that's interesting. We also have tablature, of course, that a lot of people use, and this is used a lot in the rock world for guitar players because it's a way of telling you which fingers are on which strings. But it's also historically interesting in that it was used in the Renaissance for the stringed instruments then, and that's especially relevant at Regis because Regis is a very small school with a small music program, but it actually has one of its specialties. It has to do with early music. There's an actual ensemble that some of my students are in called the Collegium Musicum, which is a Renaissance music ensemble. So I don't know that anyone's actually playing lute in it and reading lute tablature, but it's anyhow, knowing about that origin of tablature is relevant for my class. And as you've also seen, if you watched a couple weeks ago or 3 weeks ago maybe, I have a blind student in my class and I'm working to make my materials be accessible. So meaning I want everything to be as friendly within MuseScore anything I do that involves MuseScore, I want to make as friendly for the screen reader as possible, and make it so that when you navigate things, it reads it. So I've been making improvements to MuseScore there, but I'm also making my teaching materials themselves accessible. I'm going to show you some of those techniques. And then we're going to be using Braille music some, at least with Elizabeth, the student in question, but I want to familiarize the rest of the students with Braille also, and maybe use this as an opportunity to sort of, I don't know, do some collective community building of helping get some of the music, some of the materials that we need, maybe available in Braille format, by having maybe some students would be interested in helping. And then I also, because the previous time I had a blind student, I decided to learn some text-based systems of notating music. This handout also goes into those. So why am I showing you the handout itself? Well, because as you do this, you see all these different elements that I'm dealing with, and now I want to talk about how I actually did it. So these are 3 different text-based music notation systems. And again, my goal with this handout isn't to teach them to you, but to show you what they look like and give you information, really basic information about them. So I put this handout together within MuseScore. Right now you can kind of see, like you see all the outlines for the frames and this. I want to turn that off so you can see what the thing really looks like. So if I go to the View menu and turn off Show Invisible, and turn off Show Unprintable, and turn off Frames. There we go. Now you're going to see something resembling how this will look when printed. So you can see a number of techniques that I've got. I've got text mixed with notation. I have this highlighted text from my annotations that are just pointing things out. I'm using some arrow characters within it to point to individual things. I've got some of these sort of disembodied notes so I can show you, ooh, look at that. This is, I think my word stem is overlapping the stem, isn't it? And that's why the stem looks a little funny there. Yeah, that's the case. Okay. 2, 3, 4, 5. I like to do things in round numbers. I'm going to undo that actually, because I want to show you the other way of doing that. Get back to where I started. Okay. Yeah, these are some of the techniques that I've got. I've got this system here doesn't start all the way at the edge. I've got it indented so I can put some information to the left. Here you can see, I guess nothing too special about this, but it's a tablature staff. The rest of it was standard notation except for these few disembodied big notes. And then there's more text, and then there's a little section of what looks like Braille music. And then just more text. So to put this together, let me turn on all those invisible things so you can actually now see a little more what I'm doing. What I've done here is I'm using frames for the text. And the formatting here, what I've done, I'm going to go bring the inspector back. I created a user style. So under style, there's normally 6 user styles here, 1 through 6. I've redefined user 1 to be called heading, and I've redefined user 6 to be annotation. And the reason I'm using 6 for that is, you might recall a previous Café, I showed an extension that I had built where I also used user 6 to be annotations. So I just decided for consistency, I'm using these annotations a bit differently here, but for now at least I'm using that as user 6. So in order to rename these styles, you can't do that from the inspector. You do that from Format, Style, and then under Text Styles, I scroll down to where those are. And so this was user 1, but I renamed it to heading here. I could similarly rename user 2 here. So as you can see in here, I actually did, I guess, redefine user 2 to be annotations because I can see it's yellow, but then I changed my mind and decided to use user 6 for it. So in here, I've made a few changes. I've made the heading be 16 point. I've made it be bold, and I made it, well, you can actually tell by which reset buttons are enabled. These disabled ones mean I haven't made any changes. So I changed the name from user 1 to heading, so that's why the reset button is available. I changed the size from whatever the default was to 16. I changed the style to bold. And I think those are the only changes I made for heading. For annotation, I changed the name. I guess the default size was 10. I left that alone. I made the color of the annotations be red, but I also made there be a rectangle for a frame. Not that I wanted to see the frame, but I wanted a background color, and that's how you can get a background color. So I made there be a rectangle, but I set the thickness of the frame to 0. And that's what gave me that. So if I think the default, well, I'll go back to whatever the default was. You can see now there is a visible frame, but I didn't want that. So I made the frame be 0. And then under highlight, I picked a color, or I typed in I think I typed in some codes for a color that I know works well. But then I made sure the alpha channel was set to 255. This is a Windows thing. Each operating system has a different version of this color picker because it's designed to look like the standard one, or it might even be the standard one that comes with Windows. So alpha channel is how we handle transparency in computer graphics. So, and this is what it's called, is alpha channel in the Windows picker. In Mac or Linux it might look different, but the default 0 would make this transparent, which is the default. The background behind text is completely transparent, so you can see other stuff through it. But I wanted the background, so if you set it to be yellow, you won't even tell. You won't even be able to tell. If I change this back to 0, then you'll see suddenly my highlighting is no longer visible. It's completely transparent. So a lot of people will try to set a background color and then wonder why they can't see it. And the reason is it was set to be transparent. You don't have to go fully transparent or fully opaque. You can make it like 127, and now it's you can see the staff lines here kind of show through a little bit. So I debated how I wanted to do it, but in the end I decided it was most readable at fully opaque. And this is another accessibility concern. I might be able to read the text even with lines going through it. As I mentioned, if you're like fully blind, I want to make it accessible. The screen reader will read the text. It won't care that there's lines underneath it. The screen reader will just read this text. But if you're, say, visually impaired, like you've got some vision, but not at 100%, then you want things to be as clear as possible. And having things like having to read text that's got lines going through it, that's just a barrier that you don't need. That's not like some thing that I've read that I know or anything. That's just something I feel is likely the case. I still need to learn more about that. So anyhow, I made my annotations be yellow and I made them be opaque. But this one here I can see now is overlapping that stem a little bit, which is why, especially as I zoom in, you'll be able to tell what's going on, right? It's overlapping that stem and making the stem look funny. Well, I could move this and solve that problem. But just so you know, there's another thing you can do, is make it be behind the stem. In other words, let the stem cover the annotation instead of vice versa. So in order to change the order of things, right now the stem is higher than, like if you think of these things being physically stacked, the stem is underneath the annotation. That number is what's here as the stacking order. So 4100 is the I guess default for this annotation here. If I click the stem, you'll see it's 1800. I always forget which number is which, but I can see, well, 41 is more than 18 and it's on top. So if I make this be something less than 1800, it will go below. So I might just make it be 100, and boom, now it's below the stem. There you go. So that's a way you can control which items are on top of which. And if you're adding things like I am here, adding annotations to things, that could be a useful technique to know about. Realistically, though, I would just as soon take this guy and just move him a little bit so that it's not 1, 2. I'll just move it just that little bit off. So now it's not overlapping. And I made myself a copy so I didn't accidentally mess up the original. But when I think about it, I'm like, gee, I want to make this fix to the original, right? So I'm going to load my original and actually make the same change there. Oh, okay, so this is like a weird MuseScoreism. I saved it as a copy, but then when I went to load it, it still thinks this is the original. It's a little confusing thing. If you do a save as while you're editing something and then you try to load the original, it gets a little confused as to which is which. So I don't want to get confused. So I'm just going to close both of those. Now I will reopen it. So I'm going to make my change to the original. I'm just going to trust myself not to mess up. So I'm just going to move that guy one click off and then save it again. All right. So those are some of the techniques I've used. Some of the other techniques I've used is, well, you can see I've got frames here. So this is a text frame that I inserted. And then, so in order to do that, let me insert some more text frames. Like I'm going to insert, let's just go ahead and just do something else here. Let's add some more stuff after, I don't even know how you're supposed to say that, Jianpu. Let's say I wanted to add some more text here. I'll click this and I'm going to go to Add, Frames, Append Text Frame. So it appended it to, and it went to the next page because it didn't fit on this page. One of the reasons it didn't fit is the default gap above this was 7. And that's good because if you've got a staff above it, you're gonna want that space. But since it's another frame, I don't really need that space, so I'm just going to change that to 0, and that caused it to move to this page. So probably the page view should have automatically scrolled. Little bug that someone could fix if they wanted. So I've appended my text, and now I can double click here and add what my next heading should be. It's some other type of notation that I might want to talk about. How do you say these? Is that the right word? I forget now if that's, you know what I'm talking about? There's like a Renaissance music notation thing. So when in doubt, we do a web search. I either have that word right or I have something wrong. Phrasing of a group. Yeah, okay, so this is a system of, yeah, as it says, it was a basic element of notation before the invention of staff notation. So I could enter, you know, I might put a little section on that in my handout also. That's not the name of the system. I don't know if there is a name for the system. I'll have to look that up. I'm not familiar with the system, so, you know, I'm not going to really worry about it. But that's how you'd add this information. So, but this now, if I scroll back down, you'll see it's not in that nice little header font. So what I do is now change my frame text to heading. These are actually just plain bold. You can't change, like when I made that change in the inspector, it changes the entire content of this frame text. And that's not what I wanted here. I just wanted one word to be bold-faced because it's like a secondary heading. So I just made that one word bold. But text-based systems is heading. This is all still just plain frame text. So that's what I did. I started appending frames and setting their gaps to be 0 because it's 0 because the gap, the bottom gap on the frame is 7. So I'm already got 7. I don't need an additional 7, right? Now, when I click this, I meant to click the frame, but you can see it highlighted the text. Here's a little trick that you might want to know that's useful not just for this. When there's two items directly on top of each other and you're having trouble selecting one, control click will select the one underneath. Then control click again, selects the top one, control click again. Well, if I do it, it'll unselect also. You can see now nothing selected. So control click will sort of toggle between selecting an item and unselecting it. But if there's something underneath it, it'll first select the thing underneath it, and then control click again will unselect. So that's a useful technique if you're trying to select something that's kind of covered by another element. So yeah, that's something I did, was add those frames. You can also see here that I added horizontal frame here. Well, you might not have known that's what it was, but that's a horizontal frame. So that's how I was able to get words here to the left of the staff. So I can do that by clicking here and then saying add frames, insert horizontal frame. And now I've got a horizontal frame, and I can go right click and then add text and then say tablature. Now, horizontal frames don't automatically resize themselves, so I will double click that frame and expand it. I'm using Control right arrow to expand it big enough for my text. This text now is just showing up as a word. Maybe I want this to be my nice little annotation font. So I'm going to come back to the inspector and change it to be annotation. And now it's yellow background, red text. So these are all things that I set up in creating that text style. Now, every time I want to create an annotation, it's pretty easy. I can add some other kind of text, whether it's frame text here, or in this case, this is actually staff text. If I look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see it's staff text. I created it just with Control T, staff text, but then I can change it to annotation, and now it's yellow. I also made the annotations go a little closer to the staff for some reason. I guess I thought that might be useful. Click delete, don't really want it. Yeah, you can enter staff text and make it an annotation, or you can enter frame text and make it into an annotation. Annotation is a text style that you can apply really to any type of text. I could take fingerings and make them look like annotations, or I could make repeat signs like codas and so forth, make those look like annotations if I wanted. But I don't really want that, so I'm going to delete it. These are some of the elements that I've played with in here. Here's another one. You remember when we looked at the sort of real version of this. In fact, let me load the other one, the copy, and then I'll go to that one and I will turn off the invisible, turn off unprintable, and turn off frames. So you can see the staff lines are gone here, right? Oh, and this one I had moved over. I don't know. If I make a change, I'll make it to both of them just in case. Save this guy. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so you can see that in the version in which I've made everything invisible, because this is how it'll print, there's no staff lines here because I'm really trying to focus on the parts of the notes. So how did I do that? There's a couple things that I did. One was I made this staff extra big. Well, first of all, this staff looks like it's kind of floating in midair. Well, that's because there's this horizontal frame here. There's text in that horizontal frame, but it's bigger than the frame, but that's okay. I just let it be bigger. I expanded that frame, made it larger left to right. Control click doesn't work because I'm editing it. I don't want to be editing. Okay, there we go. So here's the width of that frame. This frame looks like it's floating in midair, like, it's not all the way to the left, and that's because this frame is there. But the other thing about it is, notice there's no clef, there's no key signature, and it's bigger, and the staff lines are invisible. How did I do that? Well, another thing you should know is this score actually has more staves than you can see here. If I go to Style and turn off Hide Empty Staves, you'll see that there's actually a regular staff here, a big staff here, a tab staff here, and a piano staff there. It's just that I'm only using whichever one is relevant at the time. For this example here, I just wanted one single staff, and so I used the top staff for that and added my annotations to it. For my big example, I created a second staff here, and when I go and show you the big example, you can see it also has everything, but then I only entered notes and things onto that staff. And then for my example here, showing my famous Mary Had a Little Lamb arrangement, I left the tab staff and the big staff empty and entered information onto the others and so forth. And then I think after that, the tab staff has everything empty except the tab staff. So that when you go to Style and then Hide Empty Staves, I also unchecked the Don't Hide in First System, because one of the things that often happens, like in an orchestral score, you'll want to see all the staves in the first system and then hide empty ones after that. So the default is that way, but I didn't want that. I didn't want to see all the staves on the first system, so I unchecked Don't Hide Empty Staves in First System. So when I do that again, you can now see it's back to the way I had it, where the section on tab only shows the tab. The section on the note, the parts of a note, only show the notes. This part here only shows that staff. This part here only shows those 3 staves, and so forth. So I used the different kinds of staves. This staff here, then, I right-clicked on. Oh, by the way, don't try to hit the Hide Empty Staves until you've entered your music. Otherwise, everything's empty and the staves all disappear. So you don't want that. So you live with it. Actually, there's a trick to that. I'll show you too. What if I decided I did want another staff here? Well, I can click this note. If I know the other staff I want is above it, I'm going to use Alt up arrow to navigate to the staff above. All right, the cursor is now on the staff above. You can't see it because it's empty. But as soon as I enter a note on it, boom, there it is. And you can actually now see it. So there's that. But I don't really want that. Okay, this staff, when I right-click on it, I'm going to go to Staff Part Properties. You can see I checked the invisible staff lines here. I also set the scale of it to be 200%. And I turned off Show Clef. I turned off Show Time Signature. Key signature isn't in here because key signatures are only relevant for, they're not relevant for tablature. They're not relevant for percussion. So it's only in the advanced style properties where you can get key signatures to disable. So I disabled that because this is the dialog that changes depending on whether we have down here under template, you can see I can change between all these different types of staves. If it had been a percussion staff, we would see that option, but this isn't a percussion staff, so I don't have that option. So anyhow, I unchecked the clef. If this had been a percussion staff, then the clef option, the key signature option wouldn't be there. That's what I meant, key signature, not clef. Because percussion clefs will never have key signatures, so that this option I think doesn't even appear for percussion staves. But these are the ones common to all staff types. So I turned off clef, I turned off time signature, turned off key signature, and that is how I got this and made staff lines invisible, which is why once I turned off show invisible, the staff lines completely disappear, so you can really just focus on the notes. So these are some of the things that I've done on here. It's really just about everything. Oh, one little clever thing. Notice I've got these arrows pointing here. I thought about this some. And yeah, we've got some lines built into MuseScore, and I could use lines and try to point them directly to things. But that felt like more work than I wanted. So I'm going with this approach. While I'm editing this text, I move the cursor to the beginning. You actually can't see the cursor, I think, because of the colors I'm using or because of the opaque background. To be honest, I'm not sure why I can't see the color, why I can't see the cursor. But like right now, the cursor is right between the B and the A, and I don't see it at all. I am not sure why. In fact, let's find that out right now. I'm going to turn off. What am I going to do? I'm going to make the highlight be that. Yeah, so that definitely seems to be it. It has to do with that highlight color. I guess the opaque highlight color is interfering with the ability to see the cursor. That's a bug too. To be honest, I've been just living with that while I've been working on this. So if I double click this, let me just reset that to the default, because that is the default. Okay. I don't know where the cursor is now, but if I hit the home key, which on my keyboard is function left. Oh, I have a home key also, but I usually use function left because I'm used to it. Most of my keyboards haven't had a home key for a while. The cursor is now at the beginning. I then press F2 or use this button here to bring up the special characters dialog. And here, under Unicode symbols, arrows. I got all these arrows, so I can just double click one. Right? Here's one, an arrow pointing both ways, or diagonal arrows and so forth, right? Cursor's there, so you can insert by double clicking characters here. I think maybe you can drag and drop. No, guess not. But double clicking these inserts that character at the cursor point. So I've just been using those arrows to insert my those symbols there. And yeah, I think that's. I think I'm going to like that better for, yeah, I don't know. It's just going to be easier for me to deal with as I'm moving things around, and it'll be simpler for the layout and so forth, I think. So that's my claim. One of the other things that I've done here is in this Braille section, this is an image here. Let me go back to my version with all the stuff turned on. So you can see there's a frame here. This is a vertical frame. And it's a vertical frame because text frames automatically resize according to the text that's in it, but this isn't text, this is a picture. So the text frame wouldn't have resized itself. So instead I added a vertical frame, and those you add the same way. You click where you want it to appear after, and you say add frames, append vertical frame. If I say insert, it inserts it in front of. Actually, append goes to the end of the whole score. So you always, if I want to put it in front of this, I'll say insert vertical frame, and you see now I have a new vertical frame, and I can size it however I want. Once you have your frame, you can right-click it and say add picture. And then you'll have the opportunity, it'll bring up a dialog where you can pick a picture. You can also drag and drop from another program into here, I think, pretty sure. Or you can use copy and paste. You can copy from another program, paste into here. Lots of different ways of getting that picture in there. So this picture is a picture of some Braille that I created using this really awesome tool called the Braille Music Notator. But because it's a picture, one thing you might know if you've ever done any web design is pictures obviously aren't very accessible to blind users. So you're supposed to include a description of all your text, and then a screen reader will read that description. Well, I don't have, MuseScore doesn't have that concept, but what I did instead is, I'm going to move this aside, I put in text here and made it invisible. So a sighted person won't see it. They also won't see it because the picture's covering it up, but elsewhere I'm probably going to use invisible text that's not covered by a picture. Something that I want the screen reader to read, but I don't want other people to see. It's there to explain something that wouldn't be apparent. Like I might add some invisible text to sort of explain a little more about what's going on in this picture, because they won't know that this arrow is pointing to the stem. They won't be able to see the arrow, so I might have to add some text to clarify that. That's the sort of thing I might use this technique for. So I've added invisible text that then a sighted user won't see, but a screen reader will read it, and so a blind user will get to hear that read as if it was the description of the actual image. So that's a technique that I plan to use as I create these handouts. And my idea is that these handouts then will be sort of self-contained things I can give to a sighted or blind user, and the sighted person will look at it and read it that way, and the blind user will have their screen reader read it to them, and either way they'll all get the same information out of it. You know, there might be a few little visual things that just for whatever reason won't be as apparent to the blind user, like where that word stem was actually pointing, but most of the information I will be able to make accessible this way. Now, I keep talking about that because, well, obviously, if I have a blind student in my class, I need to be thinking about that. Not everyone necessarily needs to be, but maybe you should be. If you're producing educational materials, you know, it's really a good idea to make things. They always tell you that in web design, adding an image, add picture. add a description to it, alt text. But people don't tend to tell you that if you're creating other educational materials, and so as a result, we have all these textbooks and educational materials that are just not accessible at all. And really, it's not that hard to just take some of these extra steps of adding some invisible text here and there to explain something that's otherwise graphic, to do things like I mentioned, make sure that the text you added is clear enough. Is this big enough? I don't know, but you can make it bigger. So if you're visually impaired, I can make this as big as I want and see it that way. So I'm not worried about making this large print because you can just zoom in within MuseScore. But someone who wanted to could always use they could change the overall scaling factor of the score and see the whole thing bigger. I won't guarantee that all my nice layout. Actually, now that I say it, I have to find out, right? If I just decide to make the entire staff size much bigger, how is this going to look? So the answer is okay, these things don't work anymore, right? My key signature is no longer pointing to the key signature because all the adjustments I made here didn't scale exactly right, and that's a limitation in how I did these things because I couldn't attach the text directly to the key signature. I had to attach it to an invisible rest and then move it over there. So that did not scale very well. So that's something that I should think about also. Now, some of the other things, like notehead is pointing there, the stem is at least in the ballpark of where it belongs. Some of these other things are basically good. Yeah, the bar line is nowhere near the bar line. That's a shame. Oh, that's because this used to all fit on one line. Mary had a little lamb that used to all fit on one line. So there was a bar line right there. But now that it's on two lines, it doesn't fit anymore. So a lot of these tricks that I'm doing aren't going to work if someone tries to zoom, not just zoom in, but actually change the size of the score. So that's something I would have to think about. I'm going to just undo that change. I'm going to have to think about that. If there's ways of making this so they actually work, if someone decides to change the entire staff size. But I'm not going to worry about it too much because my goal is that people will use this within MuseScore, not just print it out, but use it within MuseScore so that when there are examples, they will actually be able to play them, right? You can't do that just printing it out. So that's, by the way, I never did a sound check on this. What the? Okay. Yep. Okay. Good. Y'all see my cat? Okay. Here's Claudia. Hi. Say hi, world. Say hi, everyone. There's Claudia. Okay. She doesn't want to be on TV. Okay. I'm hoping that people will actually use these handouts within MuseScore. So I won't have to worry about things like that too much. Because you can spend all your time worrying about things like that and then not get to spend time worrying about the content. So you got to find the right balance here. And what I'd like to do is encourage people to use MuseScore to make it so that they can actually get it to be interactive. That's one of the coolest things about this, is making it interactive. By the way, so this Braille example doesn't play at all, right? So I could conceivably add an invisible staff here so that I could have that example play. If my goal was to actually teach you Braille here, I think I would be doing more of that sort of thing. So I might do a separate handout where I do a little bit of that. Hey, Colleen, hope you're feeling well, recovering nicely. What's my point? My point is I want people to be using these handouts interactively within MuseScore, because especially as I'm getting into real theory and talking about why this is a G sharp here, why I've got an E flat here, harmonically I want to talk about what's going on in my arrangement here, then it'll be really important to hear these things. So anyhow, those are this is like this fairly complex handout that I put together using techniques that are all supported in MuseScore. One of the things that I should then show you is I then saved a version of that and called it Handout. I made it only be one page. I simplified it a little bit, got rid of the what did I do? I got rid of the extra big staff there because I wanted my what I'm leading to is I made this a template so that I can create future handouts that will have these text settings here and a couple other style settings that I made already there. So this is now called Handout, and I saved it. Let me save as. You'll see it's saved to my folder that's called Templates. And by saving it to my Templates folder, what this means, and it's called Handout, right? I thought I actually changed the name of this to say Handout, but I guess I didn't, so now I have. So if I now go to create a new score, I might say treble clef. Under custom templates, Handout is now one of my options. And then, I can then go pick a key, pick a time signature, and I now have a score that is set up using that template. So one of the things I didn't show you there is at the bottom I customized my footer to have a link to where these handouts are actually going to be in the course, the online course that I'm developing. So the score I just created also has that already entered. That's part of the template. And the way that information gets added for the footer there is format, style, header, and footer. And this is where I entered that information so that currently these are formatted as if they're going to have different even and odd pages, so that printing in a book, if I decide to do that, you get the page numbers on the outside margins. Gigi, hey, Gigi's here too. You want to come? Come up. Yeah, you. I'm talking to you. She's looking at me. Well, Claudia's coming up. Well, if Gigi comes up, I'll show you Gigi too. So anyhow, I entered that, the link to where these handouts are going to be online, into these boxes here to be on the left side of odd pages and on the right side of even pages so that the page number can be the other places. This much was by default. This should really just say, this by default was just used the copyright that I enter in when you create a score, you enter a copyright message, but I don't want to have to keep entering the same copyright message over and over again, so I just typed the copyright message directly into the footer. I'll just have to remember to update it in 2020. So that's how I got the header, the footer, anyhow, to have some extra information in it. So now anytime I create a score from that template, again, when I do that, you'll see, it shows you, oh, this is what this template looks like. And you can see it's got a footer. You can see it's got some cool yellow text and stuff. That's what I've been working on lately. So I've been putting together handouts like this, and as I discover additional things that, it would be really cool if I had this set up, I'll maybe make a change to my style setting, and then I'll go back to my template and I'll make that same change there so that future worksheets get the same benefit. There's lots of stuff that could be talked about with MuseScore in education, and I've talked about lots of different things in other presentations that I've done. But since this is what I'm working on right now, decided I would go into some depth on this, and that feels like about the right amount of information to be giving you. So hopefully people who are using or thinking about using MuseScore in an educational setting, hopefully this gives you some ideas of some things that you can do, because it's a really powerful tool for creating these sorts of worksheets, and the fact that they're then interactive so that people can hear the Gigi's just playing but not wanting to come up. yeah, creating these worksheets and then also making them interactive is just really beyond cool, I think. And then if I upload this to MuseScore.com, people will be able to access them on MuseScore.com and play them back there, or play them on their phones and so forth. Oh yeah, all this same stuff that I just did of like making this arrow point right to the bar line, that stuff's not going to play so well on a phone. So I'd have to really think about, again, this technique that I'm using to fine tune the position of things. This particular handout is not going to scale as well. Most of mine won't have as much going on, like where I have to point that specifically to things. If I'm just pointing to a note, that note, the annotation will follow the note around. And I think mostly my annotations will just be following notes. So needing to point to individual little pieces of notation, that's only going to be on the couple of handouts I have dealing with notation. So I might take the extra effort on just those couple handouts to make them scale better. I don't know. We'll see. I don't have a good strategy for that, though. So I don't know what I would do to make that happen. Okay, so I think that's going to do it for me today. And as always, if people have ideas for things you'd like to see me talk about, I'm always open to ideas of future things. One thing I can tell you coming up is we recently announced, like just yesterday, kind of a timetable for MuseScore 3.3. MuseScore 3.3 will be the next release of MuseScore, and it's going to include a few new features and bug fixes and stuff. But one of the big things it's going to include is some stuff that's going to hopefully, some of the changes, the accessibility improvements that I have made that I was showing off in the demo I did with Elizabeth a few weeks ago. Much of that work, hopefully all of it, but as much of it as possible, will be part of 3.3, and there will be some improvements to the palettes that I haven't seen yet. I didn't do this work. It was being done by Dimitri. Well, a guy named Martin did the design, and Dimitri did the implementation of basically redoing how the palettes work. And so I'm kind of excited to see what it's about, because I don't really know what the changes are about, but hopefully it will improve the accessibility of them, so that we don't have to rely on the palette search being the only way to have the palette to be accessible. And if it also allowing for the possibility of assigning shortcuts to palette items someday, that would also be nice. But I haven't heard that that's going to be part of this. So anyhow, I want to talk about 3.3, and I think by next week there will be a beta of it. So I will probably do the Café next week on that, so that I can show off the features of the beta so that people can start trying them out and testing them, because that's the whole point of a beta. We want to get people trying it out. So I have a feeling next week will be about the 3.3 beta, and then I might do a follow-up when it's finally released. But we're looking at releasing it in another month, so end of September probably. So that's my story, and I look forward to talking to you again next week. See ya.